Hi, my name is Cecil Walker,
And I'm Adam Frower.
and this is Possibilities. Today we're going to be unlocking the secrets of empathy. How do you find empathy when it might be hard to empathize?
Oh no, no question.
You're the one who got that doctorate degree, which means you have answers. Well, I think a good place to always start is, to define what we're talking about. And as maybe obvious to some, especially someone with a doctorate in therapy, maybe empathy isn't obvious to everyone. What is empathy?
I mean, you could write a whole book about empathy.
Good.
But I think one of the things I guess that I would say about empathy is I think oftentimes it's described as like feeling what somebody else is feeling. But I think I might add maybe a nuance to it a bit of there's an understanding. It's not just that like if you're sad, I'm sad, but it's that I have an understanding for why you might be sad or what the experience of sadness might be for you. And so I think there's a component of self-experience that informs my understanding of what you might be experiencing.
Yeah, I would say exactly the same thing. And whenever I hear empathy, what I picture is what happens for me when I feel like I'm empathizing with someone is this, my thinking process is always very visual. So I literally feel myself situated in whatever they're going through. And it happens automatically sometimes, especially, I guess, if it's a person or a narrative that I feel like I can easily empathize with. You just kind of feel, or I can just experience it kind of through what they're telling me, through what I've heard about what they're going through. Almost like a visualization with me in the driver's seat. But I think it's to the effect of exactly what you're saying, that it comes with the understanding, it comes with the emotional experience of it, it comes with all of that. And I think part of the really functional outcome of that is, a big part of that is what you said, like, oh, I understand how they're feeling and what brought them to where they are now because of these things. But also it feels like it's like humanizing, like it feels like it's all right for them to feel the way they feel or to behave the way they feel. It's all right for them to react to this moment, because if I were to place myself in that position, I can now understand how, you're a person in a circumstance, and the feelings might just come to you, the experiences might just be kind of happening at you. So yeah, it feels like it humanizes a bit. It kind of takes the pressure off of how did you create the problem or the bad thing that you're experiencing, and more of this is a thing anyone could be dealing with, and it's so unfortunate that this person, if it's something difficult, is experiencing. But I guess that brings up another point too, is that it usually is with the negative circumstance. I guess we should specify too. Can empathy be can you empathize with someone who's experiencing something positive or neutral?
I think yes. I don't think we usually use it that way. I think we usually use it as like, I have compassion, or I have, my heart goes out to you because of what you're experiencing. But I would say we very much can experience empathy. I think that's one of the reasons that I think we watch TikTok or YouTube or Instagram or whatever for lots of different reasons. But I think one of the reasons we do is because we like to smile, we like to laugh, we like to kind of get that feeling of camaraderie. And I think we send clips to each other to be like, look at this cute thing, or look at this thing that happened, and it infuses in us those feelings of happiness or satisfaction or joy. And that can only happen because we're experiencing what the person in the video must have been experiencing. So I think if it can happen through technology in that way, then inevitably it can happen if we're sitting face to face with someone.
Yeah. I guess it's the same exact process of situating yourself in their place, in their experience of a thing, to some extent. Well, the whole big question for this conversation is, how do we do that? How do we empathize? How do we conjure up whatever it is, or
I'm gonna start asking you
do
questions now.
the activity of empathizing? No.
I'm gonna need you to empathize with how you're putting me in a situation where I have to keep answering all these questions. But I think how to. I think I'll start basic, and then I'm sure you and I will build as we go. But I think one of the first steps to empathy, and I think maybe this is why that word understanding is so important, is that we have to, understand the context. I'll give an example, I guess, that happened this morning. So I have a daughter, and we're getting close to the end of the year, and so there are tests that are coming, and they're big tests, and so there's some nervousness and anxiety around these tests. And she asked me to wake her up early so that she could study for her test. Mm-hmm. So I woke her up about 45 minutes sooner than usual. And then when it was time for her to go, then I went back in and I was going to say, like, it's time to go. And she got... angry is too strong of a word, but she got kind of annoyed with me, and she was like, I didn't have enough time to study. Why didn't you do that? And I just felt this like lash of outrage, and I was like, and my immediate reaction was not one of empathy. My immediate reaction was like, look, I told you to study. I offered to help you study. I woke you up early. I did all these things to facilitate. And so in that moment, I didn't try to understand. I didn't try to empathize. And then we kind of separated ways for a minute. And as I walked away, I thought, okay, so what does she really need in this moment? It's time to go to school. There's nothing. I can't wake her up any earlier than I did. I can't help her study anymore. Like, the time has come. So what does she actually need? And one of the things that she ended up needing is just, in essence, to say, like, I care. I can tell that this means a lot to you. I can tell that you want to do well on this test. I can tell. And as I started to say, like, I can tell you really want to do well, then one of the things she started saying is, well, sometimes I can't remember this. It's a math test that's coming up. And she's like, sometimes I can't remember the steps. Mm-hmm. And to just be able to say, sometimes I forget too. Sometimes when there's a lot of pressure, we tend not to remember what we really do know. It's okay. It's okay not to remember. It's okay to need to take some extra time. And as soon as I said, like, yeah, sometimes I forget too, then her demeanor changed from like anger and frustration to like, you do? Like, to wonder and puzzlement and like, why do you, she still has the illusion that I'm amazing and perfect. And so she was like, well, why do you forget? And I said, it's just we all do it. It's something, and I think helping her to put her own experience into the universal experience. Everyone forgets. And it's okay to be nervous. This isn't about, did you get enough time to study this morning? It was, everyone's nervous for an exam. And as soon as she could say, I guess it's really not that I didn't study enough, it's that I'm just nervous. Then we got to say, so what do you get to do when you're nervous? Like, what happens when you're nervous? How do you manage nervousness? And so I think that first step of like, what do you do about it, is in some sense you gotta like take that step back and say, sometimes the feeling that's showing isn't actually the feeling that's present. And when you can get to a present, what's actually present, then you can say, oh, well, that's something that everyone experiences. And then just understanding if I can get to a place of I've experienced what you've experienced, that immediately helps me. Instead of me being annoyed that she's angry at me, then I can be like, yeah, I get nervous too, and I can be compassionate about that.
Yeah, I think embedded in what you were describing, I mean, you said the words, the exact words that are key to empathy. It's this like setting aside your own motives, your own conditions, your own prerogatives, and then picking up someone else's, like taking a test run of it, or at least a conditional, like what would that be if I were, in their position. And you said, what does she need? I think picking up someone else's needs, someone else's whatever, all the factors that are kind of circulating around in their world, their situation, is exactly what empathy is. And then I guess to really do the action of empathizing and putting it to a functional use is then to say, well, then how can I, contribute to this person? What can I do with this awareness of what's going on for them, what their experience is like, what they need, what they want, what they're feeling. And I think that can be really difficult because, all of us are tasked with living our lives, right? We're supposed to pay attention to our wants and our needs. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You have to, be healthy within your own self and feel like you're confidently taking on and doing the things that you need and paying attention to, what's around you and in your own circumstance. But I think that makes it all the more brilliant when we're able to set that aside a bit and say, well, what does someone else need? What would it be like to be in their position? It very much makes me think of when I was in graduate school. I grew up very poor, like our entire lives. And I think I was just as poor, maybe even poorer in graduate school. I would say even poorer because at least I knew the numbers. So here's how much I don't have. And I was noticing like every month, I was like making enough for rent and for food, and not really much else beyond that. So I was always pretty down to like, just enough money. But I lived right in the heart of the city, like right in Atlanta where, these major highways, the three major highways kind of converge. I was literally like a street over from that. And so anytime I needed to go somewhere, I would end up on that highway. I have to drive, make that turn, and I'm in these on-ramps. And there were always lots of homeless people standing around there. They converge at these congested areas to, ask for money and try to get some help from people passing by. And when I first moved there, maybe the first year and a half, nearly every single time I would give them whatever I had in my car. I'd give them, if there was change there, if I had, sometimes I'd have bottles of water or something. If I had money in my wallet, I'd give them money. And it was specifically because, I don't know why, my brain would instantly think, maybe it's because I was only barely making enough for rent. I would instantly think what it would be like to be in a position where I didn't have a home and I didn't have income. I was destitute, and I just was hoping I could get by with someone else's generosity. Every time I would instantly picture that. And even still to this day, I picture how hard it would be in that position, but also I don't know if I would even be able to ask strangers for money. I don't know if I could muster up that courage. To me, it takes courage, at least. And so because of that, like, imagery, that awareness of how difficult, and I guess maybe even subconsciously feeling like I'm not too far away from this, picturing that and having an awareness of that, just felt like, well, even if I only have $20, $1 to me is very different than $1 to them. This $1 could do something huge for them. And for me, broke is broke, I guess. I'm not going to buy something different with the $20 than I was with the $19. And so for this long period of time, I would just keep giving them and giving them. And eventually I kind of took a look at the numbers and was like, I probably should empathize with myself and not give away all of my money. But I think to that point that you were making is like when you set aside your own circumstances, your own needs, all these factors in your world and pick up what's going on for someone else, what would their experience be like? What are the impacts of the things happening around them? Suddenly, I think it changes your actions. It changes how you interact with that person. It changes what feels like is priority in the next steps that you take or the things the actions that you make. And I think that's part of a very useful and significant purpose to empathy is it gives you different behavioral options. It gives you different interactional options.
Yeah, one of the things you said, I think, makes me come up with thoughts or questions. and this is going to sound like a really brash question, but is there ever a time where empathy might not be beneficial? Is there ever a time where I could take empathy too far and I could try to put myself in someone else's situation? Maybe that means I jeopardize my own well-being. In this pursuit of empathy, when is enough enough?
I think it's probably a very big philosophical question.
Got your back. Now you can feel what I feel.
I'm not a doctor, so and so. You earned the question asking. That immediately makes me think that we're not two-dimensional people. I think empathy has to be paired with a lot of things, right? Because in any human interaction, I want to have empathy for them, but I also want to have a consideration of lots of other important things like justice and fairness and balance and moderation. Like there's all these other principles that I think are really, really important. And so I absolutely want to make sure that I am always empathizing with people, no matter the context, no matter the conflict, whatever the situation is. But I won't empathize past the point of I guess we take just the example of justice, just the example of using that empathy to override, what is deserved or not deserved, or what is right and wrong, and towards me, towards other people, however that applies. So I think empathy probably almost always needs to be part of that equation to some extent, even if we're talking about, a criminal committed a crime. Still a human being. I think empathy has to be involved in any decision making about that person's fate or that sense of justice that comes to that person. Or if we even think of celebrities and political figures or whoever, and we have this social media sphere that can condemn people. And of course, I think justice is important in that, but empathy is also important in that. It's a different reality that people live in when they're under a lot of spotlight and scrutiny, and when they hold a lot of power and pressures on top of them. And so that it can never justify or override, what is right and wrong. But it's like an ingredient in the mixture of how am I approaching this thing? How am I making decisions about this thing and interacting with this thing? And maybe that's true with all cases, that regardless of if it feels like it's a thorny one or not, empathy just needs to be a strong ingredient in how do I interact with this thing, and not a specific whole interpreter of black and white, this or not this.
Yeah, what I really like about that answer, it makes me have lots of thoughts. I'll do my best to kind of hone this down. But I think what I really like about the answer is you said empathy should always be present. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that makes me realize is that empathy is something that can inform action. It's not a determinant of action,
I like that.
but it's an informer of action. So when I can kind of take a step back and I can say, okay, so what is it about you? What is it about your circumstances? What is it about your life? It informs then how I should respond. And I guess kind of a silly example that I might give is if you have two children, right? And one kid is a 6-year-old and one kid is a 16-year-old. Mm-hmm. And let's say they both go into a store, they both steal something and walk out of the store. I, as a parent, I take into consideration, if I infuse empathy into this situation, I can say, why might they have really wanted that? What was going on for them? What was the emotional experience? What if, maybe both of them had friends that had this thing and they felt left out. Maybe they felt like they were, they couldn't live up to what everybody else had. So there's this emotional drive, and I can maybe think back, when have I felt left out, and and it helps me to respond with some compassion, to say, look, I get it. I know that you want this thing. I know that it's important for you to fit in. I know that. But that doesn't then mean that the reaction is the same, right? For a 6-year-old, I might say, it might look like I'm very lenient. And to say, look, we got to take this back. You got to talk to the person. You got to, like, we can't take this. We didn't buy this. It's not fair. Other people don't get this if you take it. If everybody took the game, then the store owner wouldn't own anything. They would lose money, right? So the compassionate thing to do, the empathetic thing, is to see it, to say, I understand why you wanted that thing. But at the same time, teaching may be the outcome of saying, like, this is why we don't always react based on the way we feel. Whereas with the 16-year-old, it's going to potentially be a very different outcome to be like, look, you know better.
Mm-hmm.
We've had these teaching moments before. So now the context is a quite different context because you're older, you're more accountable. So the consequence might be different. The outcome might be very different. Hopefully I'm still taking them back and they're still going to turn that game back in and they're going to talk to the store owner. But now maybe they lose some privileges. Now maybe they don't spend some time with their friends. Now that they, so now that the outcome might be very different. And so I think in both cases, empathy can play a role and say, look, I get why you did what you did.
Mm-hmm.
But it informs my response, but it doesn't determine my response. There's a lot of other contextual variables that determine or help me inform what the response is. So I think you made a really nice distinction between, like, just in essence having it impact without having it drive.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important thing. And then the other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is that empathy really is in the midst of the process. That as I experience what somebody else experiences, it changes who I am. It's influenced by who I am. And so I think that's the other thing, is that we also want to be aware. We want to be conscientious about, when am I feeling empathy? What's the value of feeling empathy? What's the outcome of feeling empathy? And so I think, again, it's something that can inform. It's something that we can be conscientious of,
mm-hmm.
and say, how do I want empathy to influence, to balance with, and you mentioned things like justice. How do I want empathy to balance justice? How do I want empathy to inform consequences? And so I think that's the other thing, is that empathy can raise our awareness, and it can help us to make choices. And I think this is maybe the final point, and then I'll turn it back to you. But it can influence how we determine who we want to be, right? So I think in large part, it's also comes back to, what kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be somebody who's kind and compassionate? Do I need to be somebody who holds a strict line in this place? And so what does that mean about me? And so I think the way that we use empathy in the midst of the process is really informative about who I am as a person. And I think when we remember that empathy informs identity, that's an important thing that we can use then to determine, like, how do I want to utilize that?
Yeah, I really like all of that. I think it's brilliant how you describe that empathy is an informant. It's used to inform the action that you take, and it's not the thing that's actually driving it or deciding that action. But then also this latter point too of, in a kind of poetic way, this empathetic interaction with someone else, presumably built on a your perception of someone else and their situation, actually reflects quite a lot about you and your situation, who you are, your identity. And I think looking at it that way helps, I guess, frame more of the significance of empathy, because it's not just a, for goodness sake, or even just to give away generosity and be for someone else. There's a reflexive component to it. It's for you. It's actually defining who you are, the extent to which you use that empathy, how you use it, what you use it for, and how much you're saying that this is important to you. You're going to regret turning it back over to me because I have another question. All of this, even our explanation of how to empathize, I think is built on a bit of an assumption, maybe lots of assumptions, but one assumption of you can change that. You can go from actually I don't empathize very much, or I'm not good at it, or I've chosen predominantly not to I empathize quite often and easily. How does someone become better at empathizing? And I guess that also kind of assumes it can become less of a choice too, that you just would be an empathetic person organically. How does someone navigate from here to there?
Yeah, I think my initial reaction, I was just going to answer the question straight out, but I think I want to put a caveat on my answer first. Because I also want to be understanding, and maybe this is me trying to be empathetic, but I also want to put some understanding on, for some people, being empathetic may not be advantageous. I think about a kid, who's being hit or abused or whatever, and maybe in that moment, like thinking about like, why would my parent be doing this to me? Understanding all of that might be beyond their responsibility, right? They don't need to. And I know you and I have a good friend who often says, like, I don't care what people think about me or what people say about me. Like, he is not trying to understand. He's not trying to be empathetic. He's not trying to get into their shoes at all. And I think there is a self-preservation in that. And so I want to be understanding around, like, empathy may not always be the most advantageous thing. So with that caveat, like, how do you become more empathetic? I think I think in a lot of sense, it is a decision. I think, again, like that friend, it's like he's conscientiously saying, I do not want to, because if I do, that might hurt me more. They might have malicious intent toward me. They might have, and so he's conscientiously said, that's not a good thing for me. And so I think in the same regard, we can say, why might it be good? I think what I would say, it's kind of interesting. I guess what I would say is, it oftentimes, when we develop empathy, it is looking at somebody and valuing them. I think we oftentimes do that through mostly like small acts of service, right? If we're walking, then we hold the door open. Why do we hold the door open for the person behind us? Because we notice they're carrying a bunch of stuff, or maybe they're struggling to get to the door, or maybe we just know it's a kind thing to do. And that small act of service of like holding the door, it requires that I step out of my own experience and say, what might that person behind me be experiencing? How could I make their experience just a bit easier? And so that's a really small example, but it's that awareness of what's my experience and how is somebody else's experience different than mine. And so I think it's a weird answer, because we talk about empathy all the time of like, I have to understand what you're feeling, and I have to understand my own experience informs how I know you feel. But I think in a lot of sense, it's recognizing that my experience doesn't match yours.
Yeah.
In fact, it's really different than yours. So I'm trying to just be understanding that life's challenging. I'm trying to understand that because I know what struggle is, maybe you're struggling in some way. There was one of our religious leaders, he said, somebody told him, when you encounter people, it serves you well to walk into the encounter assuming that they're dealing with something big or heavy or difficult. And he says, as I tried to do that, as I walked into interactions thinking they might be dealing with something really challenging or difficult, he said, you'll probably be right at least 50% of the time. And he said, that's what the other person told him. And he said, as I've tried to do that, I've realized the percentage of time is actually much bigger than 50% of the time. And so I think I don't have to necessarily know what like big, heavy, challenging thing you're carrying. But I can say, I know what it's like to carry a big, heavy thing. So I'm going to walk into interactions thinking, you must be carrying something big and heavy. Just that awareness makes me a little softer, makes me a bit more patient, makes me a bit more understanding, makes me more willing to reach out, makes me want to hold the door open for you. And so I don't have to completely know or understand, but I can make the assumption that you need help. And if I go through the world trying to be as helpful as I can to people who need help, more often than not, I'll be right.
Yeah. I think all of that helps to broaden this understanding of empathy in a way that is really, really useful. And one of the things you said was, if we could start to see empathy as valuing another person, valuing their experience maybe, and then even by extension of what else you said, valuing the validity and maybe difficulty of whatever struggle that they have. And I think there's inherently in that this like identifying with them, like this sharedness of we are connected through through probably potentially a lot of things, but this specific understanding of hard things that we all have to go through hard things. We all have some experience of what is hard to us, regardless of the details of those circumstances. And I really also like how you kind of looped in, there's almost this like compelling nature to when you understand someone is undergoing something difficult, you can be helpful to them. You almost feel implored to be helpful to them. Just because you know what it's like to be in a difficult situation. And seeing that as a like you're identifying with someone and then being more willing to help them. There's been a lot of research actually on that kind of stuff when it's usually framed as a like in-group, out-group kind of thing. If I identify someone as being in my group, in this circle of people that I belong to, all these different studies, come up with results where the people will see that in-group person as more competent, smarter, whatever their experience is more valid, they're more attractive. I'm more willing to help them, to be useful to them than someone who's outside of that group. And I think even more interesting than that is what defines in-group versus out-group could almost be anything. We more typically think of race or nationality or political group, religious group, some of these really big identity groups. But it could be we both like the same baseball team. It could be maybe we listen to the same music. We could be from totally different places around the world, speak different languages, but if we both love Beyonce's music, now we're part of this same group. And you see that on the internet all the time, all the Swifties, and you can belong to this large family and identify with people and feel an emotional like connection to these people and need to serve and belong to them in a different way. And what that says, I think, is that it's very possible to identify with people, to feel like your in-group is people, is other living beings who are bound to struggle with something. And so if I can identify with them, I can feel like they are deserving of help, feel like their experiences are very valid, feel like, we're kind of in this together, because I know, just like you said, what it's like to do something hard, to go through something that is tough and that is challenging. And so it's like we're primed for empathy, because we are primed to socialize the world in this way. We're primed to feel like we belong to a group and that we have some type of tie, maybe even obligation to that group. I suppose just one of the steps, though, is just reorienting the boundaries of that to say people, human beings, anyone who feels like they've got a struggle, they've been through something or are going through something. That's my in-group, and I have this tie to that person.
Yeah, you made me... One of the things I really, really loved about what you said is, in essence, you equated empathy with finding value. When I can find value in you or somebody else, then I treat you like you are valuable.
Yeah.
And I think even if we don't have the exact same experience, if I'm treating you as though you're valuable, that I take time to care, I take time to understand, I do things to express you're valuable. So I think equating empathy to viewing something as valuable is really, really important. And then the other thing is you reminded me of a quote by Gregory Bateson, who was kind of one of the pioneers of family therapy. And he said he was kind of looking at the research where they were comparing, they kind of had lined up, in essence, a bunch of men and a bunch of women. They were looking at their responses, and they were looking at, can we find inherent differences between the way that men respond versus the way that women respond? And so in essence, he created in-groups of men and women, out-groups of the opposite. Mm-hmm. And he was saying, he was looking at the research that says, like, can we find distinctions between these two groups? And one of the things that he realized is that the variance or the variability was greater within the groups. Mm-hmm. There was greater difference between this man and this man than there was if you looked at the groups across, that inevitably there was kind of the same span in women, mm-hmm. there was the same span in men. And what he said in the end of that is he said, in the end, we're all more human than not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we can just hold on to that premise of, in the end, we're all more human than not, mm-hmm. then I can connect my human experience to your human experience, and it should then change. If I just hold, you're a human, and I treat you like you're valuable simply because of your humanness, we probably don't need to worry about, is that empathetic or not? It'll be taking care of humans.
Yeah, I really like that, and I think all of it is true too. This is not some specific philosophical framework. I think it's this is the reality of just how we're constructed. These are statistical facts, even that Bateson was basing this stuff off of. And so I think that says a lot about how we are kind of constructed for this type of empathy. I mean, if you ask any anthropologist or evolutionary biologist too, they'll say that one of the distinctions between human beings and our predecessors, or even other mammals, is this collaborative kind of approach to be able to see another member of your species and do a complex kind of, I suppose empathy might be the word, but a complex kind of identifying with them, feeling like, oh, your problem is my problem, my gain is your gain. I have a vested interest in how you're doing and what you're doing and how you're experiencing things. And even if I'm not in the exact situation that you're in, or even if how well you do very practically has no effect on how well I do, I still have the ability to cross that line and to be able to say, you deserve this, or I'm willing to help you with this.
Yeah, perfect. Anything else you want to make sure
that I know of?
Okay. Well, hopefully that conversation around empathy, I think it evolved as we go in, which I think is valuable. But hopefully that kind of sparks your ideas around how to develop empathy, how to carry empathy, how to show empathy. But we would love also to hear your thoughts, that maybe they're a bit different than ours. So leave us a comment. But also, if you feel like somebody else could value from this conversation, please feel free to share this link with them. We hope that these conversations touch people and change their lives in just a little bit of a way. So if you know somebody who needs this kind of a conversation, we'd love for you to share with them. But in the meantime, go value humanness and show it.